Section 2. Domestic Citizens. Domesticated animals are those who have been selectively bred to serve human ends for food, protection, companionship, etc. Such animals, by definition, have been brought into our community and over a long period of time have become dependent on their relationship to human beings. Our actions have thereby deprived them of any alternative existence. The process of domestication historically has been full of injustices: forced captivity, forced breeding, forced labor, usually ending in premature death, and some AR theorists have argued that the relationship is irredeemable, that there is no way to restructure relations between humans and domesticated animals on a non-exploitative basis, and so we should seek the extinction of domesticated animals. We believe, however, that a just relationship is possible if domesticated animals are accorded the status of co-citizens of our political community. To say that some animals are co-citizens of our community is to make a number of interrelated claims. In addition to respecting their basic inviolable rights, it says that domesticated animals have the right to reside here in our community. This is their home. They belong here. It also says that they have the right to be considered members of the self-governing community. They are members of the people, in whose name the state acts, and they have the right to have their interests taken into account in determining the public good. Needless to say, when humans began the process of domesticating animals, they never intended such animals to become citizens of the community, and indeed might not have embarked on domestication if they had known it would have this consequence. However, in this respect, the domestication of animals is similar to the importation of slaves from Africa, or of indentured laborers from India and China. They too were originally brought, usually involuntarily, into a community solely to provide labor, without the expectation of citizenship. However, whatever the original intent, the only legitimate response today, the only possible basis for recognizing relationships on a just foundation, is to replace older relations of hierarchy with new relations of co-citizenship in a shared community. So too, we argue, with domesticated animals. Given that citizenship has a long and successful history as a tool for including historically subordinated groups, it is perhaps surprising that this idea has not been explored in the context of domesticated animals, even amongst advocates of animal rights. As we noted earlier, some AR theorists have advocated not for the granting of citizenship to domesticated animals, but rather their extinction. In the words of Gary Francione, it makes no sense to say that we have acted immorally in our domesticating non-human animals, but that we are now committed to allowing them to continue to breed. The idea that extinction is the appropriate remedy to injustice is a puzzling one. Consider the case of slavery. Capturing and transporting African slaves to the Americas was unjust, but the remedy is not to seek the extinction of African Americans, or to repatriate them to Africa. On the contrary, this would just compound the original injustice. So why think that extinction is the best remedy for the original injustice of domestication? In our view, this perspective rests on two problematic assumptions widely found in the animal rights field. Namely, A, that there's something unnatural about human-animal relations, and B, there's something intrinsically undignified and artificial about animal dependency on humans. Francione, for example, says that because domesticated animals are dependent on us for everything, they will therefore remain forever in a netherworld of vulnerability, and that such relations can never be natural or normal, and that domesticated animals do not belong stuck in our world, irrespective of how well we treat them. But as feminist and disability theorists have emphasized, dependency is not inherently degrading or undignified, and certainly not unnatural. What matters is how we respond to dependency, and in both the human and animal case, a central task of citizenship perspective is precisely to uphold the dignity of those co-citizens, who, over the course of their lifetime, exhibit various stages and degrees of dependence. Not all animal rights theorists advocate the extinction of domesticated animals, and some have offered their own account for how to reframe relations with domesticated animals, without invoking the idea of citizenship. Zamir and de Grazia, for example, argue that we treat domesticated animals justly if we meet certain threshold conditions of non-exploitation, including the requirement that we not make them worse off than they would be if left to fend for themselves in the wild, or if they had not been born at all. But these thresholds may still condemn animals to live lives of de facto servitude and subordination. Zamir, for example, defends the debeaking of chickens, or the separation of calves from cows, on the grounds that these actions are mutually beneficial to humans and animals. They make egg and dairy production more economically viable for humans, and lead to more animals being born, whose lives did not fall below the threshold of life in the wild, or of not being born. Notice how much weaker this standard is compared to those we apply in the human case. When we admit immigrants into our community, or when we bring children into the community, it would be unacceptable to condemn them to a life of indentured labor, even if they are better off than they would have been had they never left their country of origin or never been born. If we bring people into the community, we owe them the right to become full members as embodied in the status of citizenship. So too with domesticated animals. Having brought them into our community, we owe them membership and citizenship. So, on our view, facts of domestication make citizenship necessary, but it is important to note that domestication also makes co-citizenship possible. To think of animals as co-citizens, and hence to think of our political community as a mixed human-animal community, presupposes the possibility of cooperation and interaction between humans and animals, including relations of trust, the ability to communicate one's good, and the ability to exist in physically proximate and socially meaningful relations. As we will see later on, these sorts of relationships are not possible with all types of animals, but they are possible for domesticated animals. Indeed, domestication only works for animals that are sociable, able to communicate, and to adapt to and trust humans. And domestication over time has worked to strengthen these capacities. As a result, domesticated animals are more readily capable of forming relations with humans that allow them to manifest a subjective good, to cooperate, and to participate. This makes possible relations of co-citizenship, and models of animal-human political community, in which domesticated animals are not just paternalistically protected as wards of the state, but which allow them opportunities to communicate their subjective interests and to shape the future of the community. What, concretely, would co-citizenship mean? It would have radical implications across a wide range of issues. For example, if domesticated animals are co-citizens, then they are entitled to the equal protection of the law, and hence criminalization of harms to them, and to other forms of public protection, e.g. emergency services should be trained and equipped to rescue domesticated animals in case of fire, flood, and other perils. Similarly, they are entitled to benefit from public spending, e.g. healthcare, and to have their interests weighed in the design of public spaces and institutions. Any community that denied such claims could not possibly be said to be treating its domesticated animals as co-citizens. We cannot address all of these implications here, but in order to illustrate the approach, we will briefly consider two issues in more detail: socialization and work. Both issues illustrate the importance of thinking, not just in terms of the obligations arising from intrinsic moral status, but also in terms of the obligations of membership and the rights and responsibilities that flow from participation in a cooperative scheme of citizenship. Consider socialization. Membership in any community involves a process of socialization. Existing members must pass on the basic skills and knowledge that children or newcomers will need to fit in. Learning the niceties of social interaction, the duties of civility, are essential both for children to flourish and also to ensure that they do not impose unreasonable or unfair burdens on others. In the human case, failure to socialize a child is a form of abuse, like failing to feed, protect, or nurture. This is true of domesticated animals as well. Like human infants, animals arrive in the world ready to learn, to explore, to figure out the rules, to find their place. If this readiness isn't channeled appropriately, they are harmed. Socialization in this sense is a right of membership in the community. But which community? The citizenship model says that the relevant community is a mixed community. Dogs, horses, and other domesticated animals need to be socialized not just into their own species community, but into the community they share with humans and other animals. This will undoubtedly involve regulating certain natural inclinations or behaviors, jumping, biting, barking, defecating. That might be regulated differently if animals lived only amongst their own species. But for both humans and animals, socialization into the rules of membership in a mixed community is needed to sustain the cooperative relations that make the rights of citizenship possible. The content of appropriate socialization will vary. A horse born into a free-roaming sanctuary, who will have limited contact with humans, doesn't need much socialization into mixed society. By contrast, a dog adopted into a human family needs to learn much more about getting along in mixed human-animal society. While the content of socialization varies, there are some general principles that should guide the process. First, this requirement to learn how to get along is not a one-way street. Humans, too, need to be socialized into this mixed community and learn how to respect and to cooperate with their domestic animal co-citizens. Second, socialization should be conceived not as the right of guardians or states to mold individuals, but as their responsibility in providing new citizens with the skills and knowledge they need in order to thrive. Third, socialization is not a lifelong process of control and intervention, but a temporary developmental process. It is justified not as an end in itself, but because it facilitates the emergence of agency. Acceptable paternalism allows for a limited period in which adults socialize the young, but it would be pernicious paternalism, indeed domination, to turn this into a lifelong relationship of molder-molded. And yet, many people seem to view domesticated animals as permanent children in this sense, subjecting them to continuous efforts at molding, well past the age when they achieve adulthood. So far, we have been talking about basic socialization, like establishing control over bodily processes and impulses, learning basic communication and rules of social interaction, so as to achieve a threshold of social membership. But many domesticated animals undergo training of a more specific sort, usually in order to provide services to humans, e.g. guide dogs. This raises the issue of animal work. Today, this sort of training is almost always exploitative, and some AR theorists argue that any sort of animal work constitutes exploitation, because it involves treating animals as means, not ends. We would argue, however, that citizenship does not preclude all uses of animal labor or animal products. Indeed, a refusal to use others, effectively to prevent them from contributing to the general social good, can itself be a form of denying them full citizenship. Consider cases such as excluding Jews from certain professions, or prohibitions on Arab Israelis from serving in the army. Citizenship is a cooperative social project, one in which all are recognized as equals, all benefit from the goods of social life, and all, according to their ability and inclination, contribute to the general good. From a citizenship perspective, what matters is that the terms of use uphold the equal membership of all, rather than turning some into a subordinated caste group that exists to serve others. For example, many societies admit immigrants in the hope and expectation of benefiting from them, but in some countries, these immigrants are condemned to a status of exploited metics who lack basic control over their labor, while in other countries immigrants gain full membership, including the right to control their lives and labor. The former is a case of illegitimate exploitation, the latter is legitimate use. So too with domesticated animals. Expecting co-citizens to contribute is not inherently impermissible, but an acceptable model of animal work must reflect and uphold their full membership status, including their right to contribute in ways that respect their agency and choices. Because domesticated animals are highly dependent on humans throughout their lives, they are particularly vulnerable to exploitation. It is difficult for animals to exercise a right of exit, or effectively resist exploitative conditions, and it is very tempting for us to adopt a self-serving picture of their needs and preferences, that is, to pretend as if they instinctively or naturally want to serve our interests. Thus, we have a responsibility to undertake a good faith effort to understand what animals are able to communicate to us about their needs and preferences. This does not mean that we cannot use animals or benefit from them, but it does mean that we can only do so under conditions which are benign, and/or in which animals have some meaningful opportunity for refuse. For example, participation cannot be coerced through blackmail use of affection, treats, or other inducements. Consider some examples. Benign use might include collecting manure from animals to fertilize our gardens, or encouraging sheep to graze in a field of solar panels to keep the grass in check, or simply enjoying their company as companions. At the exploitation end of the spectrum, consider the case of guide dogs, or other kinds of assistant dogs. Tractable animals are identified early and intensively molded to their future roles. Training, often lengthy and arduous, can involve considerable coercion and deprivation. Many working animals are denied any real downtime in which they run free or socialize with others, or simply explore and experience their world. Their agency isn't enabled, but suppressed in order to turn them into effective tools for humans. Somewhere in between might be the case of a dog or donkey used to protect a flock of sheep, whose natural guard instincts do not require intensive training. Providing the animal has lots of downtime, this would seem to be an activity from which they can derive genuine satisfaction. Similar principles apply to the use of animal products, such as humans using the wool from sheep. Unlike wild sheep, most domesticated sheep don't shed their own wool, and are prone to disease and discomfort if it is not shorn once a year. Providing this process is done with minimal pain and stress, it would seem to constitute mutual benefit, not exploitation. Recall that in the human context, we allow for cautious commercialization of bodily products, such as hair or blood. Similarly, one could imagine keeping backyard chickens in a manner consistent with recognition of their membership status. Providing a full and flourishing life is provided for all hatchlings. Chickens are not harmed by humans taking some of their eggs. In both of the examples just provided, non-exploitation may be inconsistent with commercialization. Once the relationship is motivated by the profit motive, the necessary safeguards are unlikely to be respected, and we might decide that commercialization should be prohibited. Similar issues arise in the human context regarding vulnerable groups. Is it best to prohibit children from working for money, or to carefully regulate this work? In the case of people with intellectual disabilities, should employment be prohibited, non-profit, or profit-oriented? Prohibition denies individuals an opportunity for reciprocal citizenship, and the respect that accrues from this. But the profit motive generates a responsibility for enormous caution and oversight to protect vulnerable workers from exploitation. In between the sheep on the solar farm and the seeing eye dog who undergoes months of intensive molding, we cross the line from use to exploitation, from respectful use of a co-citizen to exploitation of a second-class one. There is no magic formula for drawing these lines, but the citizenship model does, we believe, provide us with the right lens for making these more fine-grained and contextual decisions. We hope that these examples of socialization and work give some indication of how the citizenship perspective works. It's important to note that the core of the citizenship model, on our view, is not a static list of rights, but rather is the commitment to constructing certain kinds of ongoing relationships that embody ideals of full membership and co-citizenship. When examining issues of animal training and socialization, animal products and labor, or animal health care and reproduction, we should ask what sorts of provisions and safeguards uphold the status of domesticated animals as full members of a mixed human-animal community, and which operate to erode that status, turning animals into a permanently subordinated caste. Membership, in this sense, is a morally complex and demanding relationship, which includes not only an expansive set of membership rights for domesticated animals, beyond the universal rights owed to all sentient beings, but also distinctive responsibilities for both humans and animals to learn the practices of sociability, trust, communication, and self-regulation needed to sustain the cooperative scheme of citizenship.